No, we're gonna get, are you? Good morning. The Economic Development and Small Business Subcommittee on Housing will come to order. Would the clerk please read in the letters from Speaker Tate?
November 14th, 2023. Dear Mr. Clerk, I am making the following changes to the committees for the 102nd Legislature. Representative Kevin Coleman will be removed from the following committees: Chair, Economic Development and Small Business Subcommittee on Housing. Representative Lori Stone will be removed from the following committees: Economic Development and Small Business Subcommittee on Housing. Sincerely, Joe Tate, Speaker of the House. November 14th, 2023. Dear Mr. Clerk, I am making the following changes to the committees for the 102nd Legislature. Representative Christian Grant will be Chair of the Economic Development and Small Business Subcommittee on Housing. Sincerely, Joe Tate, Speaker of the House.
Thank you. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Chair Grant.
Present.
Representatives Devendorf.
Here.
Scott.
Present.
Andrews.
Here.
Cernglue.
Here.
Aragona.
Here.
Zorn. Fink.
Here.
DeBoyer.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have 8 members. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Representative Cerniglu moves to adopt the minutes from the meeting on November 1st. Thank you. The meeting minutes from November 1st are adopted. I would first like to take a moment as we get started this morning to express my gratitude and excitement for this opportunity to lead the committee this year. I'm looking forward to working with you all as we address the housing crisis that is impacting so many. We know that housing, or the lack thereof, is one of the most pressing issues for all of our constituents across the state. It will take a layered approach that includes addressing some really hard issues, such as homelessness, the cost of construction, and even how our very complicated permitting and zoning codes are ultimately increasing the cost of rent for the most vulnerable populations that we serve. I've had conversations with many of you, and thank you for those. I appreciate them on both sides of the aisle, and I know how committed you are to this work, so I really look forward to moving together and working together. For our first few sessions, we are going to take some time to really learn together about what this crisis looks like in Michigan. What are the real numbers? What are the real data? Who is really being affected the most, and what are the things that are causing this to happen? We didn't get here overnight, and we're not going to get out of it overnight. But at the same time, we don't have a lot of time. So I really want us to be able to work together and be really intentional about what we do, using data and models from other places, learning from their mistakes, and also learning from their successes to see what will help our people immediately, or as immediately as we can. So I just wanted to let you all know that, so you're aware of kind of, how we will be working. But as soon as we have set that basis of where we are as a state, I look forward to hearing about the solutions that you guys are presenting and how we can work together to move some legislation. Today we will be hearing 2 presentations. The first is from MSHDA, and they will be providing updates on the statewide housing plan that they worked really hard on last year to put together. And each of you have people from your own districts who were a part of this plan and working with them. You will find that you actually all received some data on your exact district. I'm really a data nerd, so hopefully that is helpful to you. I thought it was really exciting and that you can learn some information about your district. And so with no further ado, we are going to have Mark Garcia come up and dig into this a little bit more. Thank you, Mark. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Mark Garcia, Legislative Liaison at the Authority. Director Hovey sends her regrets, but was unfortunately called to an event with the governor, but wishes she could be here, but instead I will pinch hit today. To echo the chair's sentiment, we are in a housing crisis. A lot of this will be redundant from one of our meetings back in March, but then again, a lot of this begs repeating. Obviously, with that crisis, we know that we have to work in a collaborative fashion in an effort to close the gap on what we view as about a 150,000 unit shortage when it comes to housing. We know this takes time and effort. Obviously, it takes a great deal of collaboration to ensure that quality, safe, affordable housing is being produced. With that, I just wanted to point to a couple data points. As many of you know, our renting population, almost half of that populace is paying over 30% of their income on their rent. That is not sustainable. Throughout the last 7 years, 13 to 20 that is, home prices went up 84%, and I was just privy to some more recent data over the course of the last 3 years. We had average sales prices increase by nearly 30% as well. Back in 2020, the average sales price in the state of Michigan was right around $213,000. As of November of last year, it's up to $277,000. That can also point to another one of our priorities, which is increasing our sales price limits, but I will touch on that towards the end. Additionally, we have lost a great deal of workforce when it comes to our construction, building and construction trades. We've yet to recover there, and obviously that is another catalyst as far as driving up the cost of production. We are working as part of our Housing and Community Development Fund programming to institute a contractors assistance program, but that's really only touching the tip of the iceberg. We know that we have to get more creative in getting capacity built when it comes to the building construction trades. And then last but not least, our housing stock is aging. We know that we need to become very creative as far as the rehabilitation and repurposing of some of our older housing stock is concerned. And we think that we have some programming forthcoming that can really help in that regard as well. Here is just a smattering of some of the programming that we have under the MSHDA roof. I'm going to be really brief in going through some of these, as I know that you wanted to touch on the statewide housing plan and some of the things that we're doing in that regard. So really quickly, affordable rental housing. We do this largely through federal funds. One of our largest programs in-house is the low-income housing tax credit. MSHDA receives roughly $25 million a year to do LIHTC deals. This allocation does come from the feds and is predicated state by state based on population. It's a very oversubscribed program. For every one development that we're able to do, we get 4 applications, so we're saying no to 3. It's a great incentive, obviously, with experienced developers that know what they're doing and really put together some quality deals. Expanding homeownership. Last year, this past fiscal year, we had one of our best years when it came to homeownership. We had just short of 5,000 new first-time home buyers. The caveat that MSHDA holds dear is that part of our programming allows for up to $10,000 in down payment assistance. That DPA simply sits as a soft second on an individual's mortgage and only becomes payable once they either refinance or sell the home. We also partner with banks and credit unions throughout the state to offer a MSHDA mortgage product as well. Quite frankly, as interest rates have gone up throughout the course of the last few years, the DPA and our mortgage product have become more desirable. We find quite often that certainly with the first-time home buyer, folks are gainfully employed, have the money to pay a mortgage, but oftentimes really struggle to put together that down payment. So we've really seen a boon in this product. We administer the bulk of the state's housing choice vouchers, roughly 28,000 of them. These are basically rent subsidies where an individual pays 30% of their income, whatever that income might be, and the subsidy takes care of the rest. Not only are there individual housing choice vouchers, but we also oftentimes will attach a voucher directly to a project, and those are referred to as project-based vouchers. Homeless programs. Our homeless prevention efforts are robust. We often are in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 million per year in our efforts to prevent homelessness. We provide emergency solution grants, and we are often partnering with DHHS and other programs to ensure that folks aren't sleeping on the street. The NEP program, Neighborhood Enhancement. This is a small but mighty program, basically providing dollars for non-traditional sorts of repairs that are going to help stabilize neighborhoods. We often pair this program with matching funds from local governments because, as you well know, they certainly have a measured interest in making sure that both their housing stock and their neighborhoods are quality, safe, and desirable to live in. The next two are programs that sadly are either ended or coming to an end, but we wanted to highlight them because of the sheer measure of improvement that they helped invigorate. The Homeowner Assistance Fund, or MyHAF, this was a mortgage and tax relief program that was funded through COVID relief dollars. It provided up to $25,000 per individual household. The average was just short of $8,000. We pushed out the door roughly $211 million, and we assisted just above 27,000 households in that. The Missing Middle Housing Program, as you all know, many of the programs that we've traditionally utilized at MSHDA are very good at servicing the 60% AMI and below populace. This was kind of the first endeavor that we took on that really tried to hit that middle income individual. This allowed for the construction and rehab of both single family and multifamily developments that service 60 to 120 AMI. We ended up pushing $110 million out the door on this endeavor. We are just finishing up the program. I believe there's just a drop left in the bucket, but as we know, this was a very oversubscribed program, and we are looking for ways to potentially bring something back online in this. The MyHope program. This invests in energy efficiency in single-family homes. Grants go out to, or dollars go out to sub-grantees, and the sub-grantees then take applications from individuals and award grants to households with up to $25,000 per home to use on things such as windows, furnaces, roofs, those sorts of things. The Housing and Community Development Fund, it's been around for some time. It was written into statute, I believe, 25 plus years ago, but it had never really been funded, at least with a dedicated source, until last year or the year prior. We are looking at $50 million per year now. That's allowed us to really institute basically some pilot programs that with the continued funding source we're looking to potentially make permanent. And I'm not going to go into each of these, but we're excited that this is allowing us to really serve some of the individuals and locals that we haven't traditionally been able to do. And then, lastly, just wanted to touch on the statewide housing plan. A couple years ago, the state came out with a first of its kind statewide housing plan. As a result of that, the governor issued an executive order creating the statewide housing partnership. We opted to go into the partnership into a regional basis. What we did was we separated the state into 15 regions, very similar to the prosperity regions map that you'll often see, but in this particular instance, we broke down the Tri-County area into their own regions, as well as the city of Detroit proper and outer Wayne County. The goal is essentially to invest housing and community development fund dollars to support each of the 15 regions. This kind of brings me to a point that I know I've been badgering you folks about for some time, which makes it critical that we get Senate Bill 293 over the finish line. As it stands, the HCDF statute, as I said, being written as long ago as it was, really only became hyper-focused on downtowns and serving the population of 60% AMI and below. What 293 does is allows the dollars to be equitably distributed throughout the state in both urban and rural areas, and also serve that middle income population. In the next few weeks, we'll be producing quarterly progress reports for each of the regional housing partnerships. These will track progress to goal for each of the regional goals, MSHDA projects that are in the pipeline within those regions, whether they're completed or about to be shovel and ground, and the dollar amounts we're investing in each region. Those will be posted on our website and shared with all regional leaders. We encourage folks, both on this committee and whether it be you or your staffs, to get involved with your regional leads. Those are also available on our website, but those plans were all submitted back in September. Obviously, the needs of each specific region are going to be different throughout the state. Traditionally, we've asked folks to come to us to try to fit a project that they need within their region into something programmatic that we've already got in place. What we aim to do here is have the regions identify their own needs, come to us, and we respond to that with a funding mechanism that can serve what it is that they're looking for. This is the website for the housing plan. I encourage you to go there. Every one of the region plans is up and posted, as well as a region map and the regional leads for each of the 15 regions. With that, I will call her quits and do my best to answer any questions. Oh, one other thing, I apologize, Madam Chair. I did provide each of you a data sheet that is district specific. It's very granular data. It basically points to housing stock, housing affordability, development conditions within the district, income distribution and home values, those sorts of things. But obviously, these are all things that are driving needs within each of the housing regions and are really going to dictate how the funding is allocated.
Thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate that. Do we have any questions from committee members? All right. I will have my office follow up. It would be great if those quarterly reports could be shared with us, and we'll make sure to share them out with the members.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, next we have Ryan Kilpatrick, who is from Housing Next, and he will be providing an overview of, this is data heavy today, so I just want to preface that. But he will be going over some data that really focuses on the current causes of the housing shortage and some potential ways that it can be addressed. So, Ryan, thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you all for being here. So as Representative Grant mentioned, I have been the executive director at Housing Next for the last 5 years or so. I've recently moved on into a consulting position and continue to consult for Housing Next, but also do consulting statewide, working primarily with local municipalities and somewhat with local developers. So what I'm going to share with you this morning is a very truncated version of a workshop that I have started to put together with local municipalities to help them understand their housing challenges and the avenues that they can explore to begin to solve those at a context-sensitive local level. One of the things that we often talk about is there's no one-size-fits-all solution to this, and that solutions really need to be tailored to the hyper-local level, sometimes the neighborhood level, sometimes the local municipal level. So what I'm going to do is really talk you through just a couple of areas that we'll work with local municipalities on. And I should mention what we're seeing the most success with is when a county comes forward and the county says, hey, we've put together a stakeholder group, typically of business, government, and nonprofit partners. And they say, we want to tackle this challenge together, but we need help. We need support figuring out how do we do it? What levers can we pull? How do we talk to the state? Help guide us through this process. And when we have business, government, and nonprofits all together at the same table, we can begin to identify challenges together that 2 of the 3 sectors didn't understand. And we can begin to talk about constraints to solutions as well as the most viable solutions. So these are the things that we'll talk about today. You'll see data here from a number of communities that I've worked with over the last 6 months or so. So you'll see Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, Mason County, up where Ludington is, and a handful of communities in between. These are example data sets, but it's important to understand some of these demographic trends as well as some of the cost trends as we think about what are our real solutions. So this is a graphic that we just put together in the last couple of days because if you weren't aware, the city of Grand Rapids actually lost population over the last 3 years. There was a decline of about 0.5% in its total population. And so that's represented by the blue line. Meanwhile, we've had an increase in the number of households over the same period of time. So more households, fewer people. And this is something that oftentimes people get pretty confused about. They say, wait a second, if we're seeing a decline in overall population, how could we possibly need more housing? What's happening is 2 demographic trends are converging at the same time. We have baby boomers whose young adult children have finally moved out of the house, which means they no longer have 4 members of the family living in a household. They now have 2 and sometimes 1. So average household size among the baby boomer generation in Grand Rapids is 1.4 individuals per household. Meanwhile, many of our millennials, especially the younger millennials, are taking more time to start families. And what that means is they're also smaller households out there competing in the market, maybe for the first time. So even though those younger millennials, imagine you've got a family of 4, mom, dad, and 2 adult kids who are in their early to mid-20s. The 2 adult kids have moved out but still want to live in the exact same city. So we still have the same 4 people in the city, but now they need 3 households instead of the 1 that they had all been sharing before. This is the demographic conundrum that we're dealing with in many of our growing places and in many of the places where we're retaining young people. We don't have enough new 1-bedroom and studio apartments to accommodate all of those young people who are moving out of mom and dad's house but want to stay in the city. And so recognizing those demographic trends is really critical as we start to think about how do we solve for some of those challenges. The same thing is true in some of our smaller towns. We're seeing this in Muskegon and in Ludington and in South Haven. A lot of people want to stay close to home, but there aren't units available that actually suit their needs. And even if they're the right size, they're often too expensive because there isn't enough of them. So when we begin to think about how do we solve for this, one of the first things that we want to do is frame up some of our priorities with our local communities. Now, these are priorities that I often will propose to them as potential options for them to consider. But the idea here isn't to create housing for housing's sake. We're not just going to produce a bunch of units because we think units is the solution. What we think we're trying to solve for is a sense of belonging in a community where young people and old people can both afford to live where they work. The other one is sustainability, both financial and environmental. What we don't want to do is continue to expand our infrastructure further and further into the exurbs, where we're not producing enough tax revenue and where we're degrading the natural environment and the rural character that we've been trying to preserve in so many places. And lastly is quality of life. We know quality of life is what attracts people and what grows our population. And so really thinking about how do we create places that people really want to be in the process of creating more housing. So one of the things that we did just for this presentation was pull statewide median income for a number of job types. And you can see what the job type is, you can see what the annual salary is, and you can see what the monthly income looks like. Or actually, that's what their monthly housing budget would be. So our assumption is if they were paying the maximum housing budget of 30% of their gross income, that's what they could afford to pay in rent or mortgage. Now, keep in mind that right now the average cost of a single family house is getting pretty close to $300,000 in the state of Michigan, which means the average mortgage payment with current interest rates is about $2,000 to $2,200 a month if you were to go get a new 30-year mortgage for a $300,000 home tomorrow. Meanwhile, median rent payment for a 2-bedroom apartment statewide is about $1,350 a month. In our higher cost markets, it's a couple $100 a month more. In really high demand neighborhoods, it's closer to $1,800 to $2,400 a month. So you can see what many of our workers are earning. Some of them are definitely earning enough money to afford rent or a mortgage. Many are not earning enough to be able to afford it. And so what they're doing is paying sometimes 40% or 50% of their income on housing, which limits their ability to save. It limits their ability to go for secondary education. It limits their ability to help a friend, to buy a new car, all of the things that we really want people to be able to do in the state of Michigan. So now this gets back to some of the demographic trends that we're seeing across the state. This is showing you, this is actually data from Kalamazoo. Kalamazoo is a little bit of an outlier because it's a university town. And so what you'll see here is the number of single adult households, the number of 2 adult households that do not have kids at home, the number of families with kids in the home, and the number of roommate situations. So you'll see the uniqueness to Kalamazoo is they've got a lot of roommate situations. That's a much higher percentage than most municipalities have. Usually we're seeing roughly 6 to 7% of households are roommate scenarios. But what's very common across the state is the number of single adult and 2 adult households with no kids at home. It's usually somewhere between 60 and 70% of all of our households are single adults or 2 adults with no kids. Meanwhile, the vast majority of housing that we're planning and zoning for across the state is single-family homes that are predominantly 3 bedrooms or more, multiple bathrooms, on 1/3 of an acre or larger. That's a great housing product. It's a housing product that has been the staple of our construction industry for a really long time, but it doesn't suit the needs of a majority of households in the state of Michigan anymore, at least not at this particular moment in time. It may be back, right? That might be the housing option of choice again in the next 10 years. But right now, it's not the most suitable option for a lot of households. And yet it's very, very difficult to build any other housing product other than single-family home on 1/3 of an acre or larger. And so we have to recognize that our local regulatory environment is limiting what the market has the ability to produce, which in turn is increasing the cost of housing across the board. So here you can see, again, this is Kalamazoo data. We could pull the data for any municipality if you're interested, but there is a clear mismatch. You can see the number of studio and 1-bedroom apartments available in the city of Kalamazoo compared to the number of 1- and 2-person households. There's a pretty distinct mismatch between the two. So as we start to talk about how do we build enough housing, or simultaneously, how do we preserve the housing that we already have to ensure that what we have that's affordable today can remain affordable? One of the things that's really important for me to communicate with our local communities is the amount that it costs to build housing, and I'll get to the cost of new construction in just a minute. But also, when we're going to subsidize housing, what does the subsidy actually have to look like in order to make it work? And so when we think about an individual or a household's income, if their income is at or below the poverty line in Michigan, which is about $25,000 a year, a very significant subsidy is necessary. Typically between $150,000 to $200,000 of subsidy on the front end to offset the cost of construction. Essentially, we have to pay for the entirety of the cost of construction because just maintenance and operation is roughly all they can afford based on their budget. And so as we think about all of our deep low income households in the state of Michigan, a lot of subsidy would be necessary if we were going to solve for each and every one of those households. As we think about middle income households earning $50,000 a year, they can afford roughly $1,250 a month. I already mentioned statewide average rent is about $1,350, so they're just under what would be affordable to their household. But building something new is different than the median rent across the board. Median rent includes 100-year-old homes that are for rent here near downtown Lansing. It includes 40-year-old apartment complexes that haven't been updated almost in the same period of time, right? So we've got some lower rent stuff. The new construction cost, what we're typically seeing is rents around $1,800 to $2,400 a month to build brand new. And frankly, it's because of material costs, labor costs, land costs, and financing and permitting. All of those things come together, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. And then you can also see for folks earning $75,000 a year or $100,000 a year, some subsidy may be necessary depending on what we're allowing for in the marketplace. If we're allowing for smaller units on less land, if we're allowing for attached for sale units, those are far more affordable than when we say, hey, you got to build something big and it's got to be on a lot of land. We are setting the floor of the price much higher than most families can afford. Now, the last thing I want to say is the good news is Michigan is still a relatively affordable state. When we compare ourselves to other markets, North Carolina, Texas, Florida, even Montana, we're more affordable than all of those states. But what we want to do is remain affordable, is not allow ourselves to slide into that lack of affordability. So real quickly, we've kind of broken down what are the costs that are baked into new construction. These are general buckets of costs, and you can see there's a fairly wide range, but there's a cost for buying the land. There's a cost for construction, just materials and labor. There's a cost for design. That's your architects and engineers. The cost for permitting and professional fees. The Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program is a really outstanding program, and it requires a lot of professional fees. You need some experts that are involved in those deals in order to make them work. And then just the cost of financing, interest. When our interest rates are 7.5%, it's very expensive to get a 30-year mortgage or to get a 20-year commercial loan that's got a 7 to 8% interest rate. And we've got to acknowledge those costs are always passed on to the renter unless there's a subsidy. There is no developer that says, I'll just eat the cost because I have a good heart. They would do one deal and go bankrupt. We need developers to be able to make these deals work and for them to be able to earn a living because 90% of our housing supply in the state of Michigan is built by private developers. So all of this is to underscore the fact that our environment for building is created by a patchwork system of regulations and requirements at the local level, sometimes the county level if the health department is involved with well and septic, at the state level, and at the federal level. Many of those regulations are really important because they protect public health, safety, and welfare. And I'm not at all proposing that those regulations go away. We do have some regulations at the local level that are impediments to building enough housing and building the right kinds of housing for the households that we have and the incomes that we have. And so really getting strategic about what opportunities we have to clear away some of that regulatory red tape is not only beneficial to our traditional development market, it's also beneficial to our nonprofit development market. The regulatory framework is the same for everybody. So even if we're subsidizing housing, if we're making it expensive to build it, it means we need to bring more subsidy to the table. And we'll talk about that subsidy in just a second. So across the state of Michigan, these are our average construction costs for residential buildings on a per square foot basis. anywhere from $250 to $325 a square foot. The Grand Rapids market right now is averaging about $265 a square foot. Traverse City and Detroit are closer to $300 a square foot. Some of our more rural markets where we have an adequate supply of labor are a little bit lower, closer to $250 a square foot. But if you all will think for just a minute about the house that you live in now, if you have a sense of the size of your home, is it 1,500 square feet? Is it 2,500 square feet, 3,000 square feet? Whatever that number is, multiply it by 250. So if you've got a 2,000 square foot home and you multiply it by 250, I can't do the math in my head. What is that? $500,000? That's what it would cost to build your home today in the current market. And so when we think about, we need thousands of versions of your home in the marketplace coming online now and over the next 5 years. But the cost to build those homes are going to range typically from $300,000 to $500,000 to build. And so you saw earlier who can afford that and who can't. There aren't a lot of workers in Michigan who can actually afford that price tag. It used to be roughly 42% of all single-family homes built in the state of Michigan were first-time home buyer homes. They were starter homes, priced somewhere between $100,000 and $250,000 per unit. Now the majority of homes getting built are $350,000 or more in cost. And a lot of it is because that's what we're requiring to get built. The same is true for residential apartments. We often have minimum unit sizes that dictate how large a unit has to be. Again, these are intentionally designed to promote public health, safety, and welfare, but often the numbers are a little bit arbitrary. Oftentimes the numbers will dictate a minimum square footage that doesn't actually make sense for the local market. We want people to have adequate amount of space. We want people to have adequate light, air, all the things. But sometimes the difference between a 500 square foot apartment and a 600 square foot apartment is negligible to the tenant, but it's going to cost an extra $30,000 for the developer to add the 100 square feet that the renter really can't afford to pay for. And so understanding those market differences and being able to account for those is really important. So what's important to recognize here, and I mentioned this earlier, if what we really need for some households is apartments and homes that are renting at $600 a month or less, we need an average $160,000 subsidy in order to make that rent work. And we've got some great programs, right? MSHDA has a bunch of great programs that can do that, but not enough programs. I think as Mark mentioned, they fund 1 out of every 4 projects that get submitted under the LIHTC program. So we don't have enough programs to serve the number of households that we have in need. And essentially, and I'll talk in just a minute about how much subsidy we would need across the state. Now, the same is true if a desired mortgage is about $900 a month. With current interest rates, roughly the same monthly subsidy would be necessary, but a larger upfront subsidy would be necessary. So now this is where it gets important for the state of Michigan. We've got 1.5 million households in Michigan that are cost burdened. That means they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing. If we were to provide the necessary amount of subsidy to get all of those households below 30% of their income in terms of the monthly amount that they contributed to housing, it's a $750 million subsidy, right? And I know that at the State of the State, the governor announced a big number that we want to try to hit in terms of total investment. But this is an ongoing subsidy amount that we would need, right? And it's not a sustainable amount to assume that we have to subsidize the majority of households who are cost burdened. We need other mechanisms. We need to allow the market to do some of the things it does well while we're thinking about subsidizing the households that need it the most. So even if we were just to support 1,000 renters in the state of Michigan who are earning at or below the poverty line, it's $160 million in subsidy, or roughly $15.6 million a year. So, and I'm going to wrap this up in just a minute. I'm happy to stay and take questions. If we can't afford to subsidize everybody that needs it, and I would argue that we probably shouldn't want to subsidize everybody that needs it, we should want to understand why do so many people need a subsidy right now, and how do we begin to fix some of those things. We've got to understand what's driving those cost burdens in the first place. And a big part of it is the large lot sizes and the large home sizes that are being required across the state, across roughly 90% of our residentially zoned district. This is the product that we require. We require a minimum of 1,200 square feet on a minimum of a third of an acre or larger. There are some municipalities that are allowing quarter acre, fifth of an acre, sometimes 5,000 or 6,000 square feet per unit. But very often what we hear, especially from young people and retirees who are trying to downsize, is they would say, I would love an 800 square foot cottage on a little lot with a shared green space where I don't have to mow it. I don't have to get up on my roof and clean the gutters. I want to be able to go to Arizona or Florida in the wintertime and turn the key and walk away. But that product isn't allowed in most of our municipalities. We can't build it today. You have to go through a special PUD process, and oftentimes they say, no, your density is too high, even though we're still proposing to build small single-family cottages. And so beginning to think about how do we correct for some of that, while simultaneously using many of the programs that you all have enabled through recent legislation, this is our challenge going forward for the next couple of years, is pairing future zoning reform, probably mostly at the local level, with new tax increment financing, the new payment in lieu of tax, the low-income housing tax credit, housing choice vouchers, as was talked about earlier, and thinking about how do we bring the private sector in to invest in impact funds. So once again, these are our basic costs of development. Underneath those percentages, you can see some of the things that local units of government have control over: maximum density standards, minimum lot widths, green space requirements. All of those things contribute to cost at the end of the day. They're all meaningful and worthwhile to explore. There is no one-size-fits-all solution, as I mentioned earlier. Every community has to define these standards somewhat to themselves. But they also need to feel like they are part of the solution. They need to be pulled into the table to talk about, are we allowing for enough housing in our community at the local level? And if we're not, how can we contribute to more housing at the right price points? So to wrap this up, one of the things that we really want to start encouraging our communities to do is understand where they have existing infrastructure. When we already have sewer and water in the ground, especially along commercial corridors, think of a commercial corridor in your local municipality where you've got empty parking lots, or you've got strip malls that are only a third full, or you've got old big box retail that has gone through 4 different users in the last 5 years, has essentially depreciated in value to zero, and isn't adding a lot of value to the community. Those are big opportunity sites to be thinking about infill housing, to be thinking about leveraging that infrastructure that's already in the ground rather than extending new infrastructure into farm fields, and to be thinking about how do we use these new tools that have been created, the payment in lieu of tax, the tax increment finance tool, the low-income housing tax credits, to build new neighborhoods on unloved properties on those corridors. That's a huge opportunity going forward. It's not going to be easy. It's going to require catalytic investments that don't make sense the first time, because those aren't places today that people think of, oh, that's a great neighborhood. You know, the corner of a 6-lane highway and a 4-lane road aren't always the places that people think of as, you know, my first choice in residential address. But by thinking about placemaking, by thinking about the kinds of towns and communities that our kids want to live in and that our parents and grandparents want to live in, many of us have the same sense of values, the same sense of character. A little bit different, right? Like some people want a little more space. Some people are comfortable with a little less space, and accommodating all of those choices in the marketplace is appropriate. But thinking about how do we fill in those gaps that we already have in our communities that are served by infrastructure, and what are the tools that are necessary to get those first developments moving so that we can begin to build a sense of place where people actually want to be, that starts to create its own catalytic momentum that other developments will then follow on after. Now, part of this is a little too urban probably for a lot of people, but part of this is about giving people choice in how they get around as much as choice in housing. So many of us, our second largest expense on a monthly basis is our cars, is how we get around. My family, we're spending, I think, about $12,000 a year. For my wife and I both to be able to drive. We're making car payments, we're making repairs, we're spending money on gas, all of the things. Most of our trips are under 3 miles. We drop my 14-year-old son off at school and pick him up every day. That's a 1.5 mile trip. I wish that I could stick him on a bike with his backpack and send him to school. He's not safe, right? I don't think anybody's looking out for kids on bikes in our neighborhood. We live on the west side of Grand Rapids. That kind of infrastructure, allowing for that to occur, is what a lot of people are looking for in the marketplace. And so thinking about how do we use our transportation dollars to simultaneously drive housing investments along these corridors is really important. And the last thing I want to say is pairing preservation with growth is a priority. Is how do we really think about all of the housing that we already have in our communities? Is it doing the best that it can do for our families? Is it as efficient as it can be in terms of the cost of utilities? Are we getting the most out of it that we can in terms of the number of families that it's serving? We've got in our community, we've got a number of homes that are 3,000 square feet or larger with just one or two people living in them. And I can tell you, many of the homeowners are perfectly happy to live in 3,000 square feet all by themselves. And some of them would say, you know what? I could divide half of my house and turn it into a separate apartment and rent it to a family friend or rent it to my daughter's friend. Those are great opportunities for seniors who want to be able to age in place and have some opportunity for additional income. But we have to allow for those things to occur, and that's part of the preservation strategy. So I think I've taken a lot of time. I'm happy to end it there and take questions if you have any.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I appreciate the deep dive on kind of where we are and thinking about where we could be. I have one question that I'll start off with. Going back to when you were talking about 90% of our housing supply in Michigan is built by private investors. Can you tell me, how does that compare to other states? Is that normal? And if we're looking to diversify who is doing development, what would be some other options outside of that private group?
Yeah. So, and when I say private, that includes both small builders and small developers, as well as kind of the big traditional home builders and developers that are kind of household names. Our 90% number is pretty darn similar to most states. There are some states that have a robust public housing authority, or even more often it's cities or counties that have a robust public housing authority that builds its own units. We don't have a lot of those in Michigan. Even where they're super robust, I mean, you think about the East Coast and the West Coast where they have more robust housing authorities that actually build and own units, they're not taking up a large share. It might be 4 or 5% of the overall housing stock is getting built by a public authority. But the vast majority of communities across the country are heavily reliant on the private sector. We're just, our national economy, the way our financing is structured, is not designed to have a lot of public housing. And that was very intentional after some mistakes that were made in the 1960s and 70s in terms of the way public housing was built and maintained. The federal government intentionally pivoted away from public housing and pivoted towards the low-income housing tax credit program and homeowner assistance program that Mark talked about earlier. So those are conversations that would have to be had at the federal level to change that. But I think for the most part, our private sector does a pretty darn good job as long as they're allowed to build what the market is asking for.
Thank you. We also have a question about in the mix of housing that is happening. You talked a lot about the size of units and square footage. Looking also at the types of units, where do you believe that like manufactured housing or other options for the types of building that we're doing falls into that as well?
Yeah, great question. So manufactured housing is a really important component of the overall solution. One of the things that we have to recognize as it relates to manufactured housing or modular housing, right, anything that's factory built, when we think about how the auto industry builds products, is very often they'll design one chassis that is for 3 or 4 or 5 different vehicles, and then they'll put a different body and a different engine on the same chassis. And so when we talk about the assembly lines, what we're doing is we're investing in the production of a particular chassis that they can then produce 3 or 4 models of vehicle that are allowed to be driven on every road in the United States, and oftentimes in Canada and Mexico as well. And so what they don't have to do is change their product every time a buyer from a different state says, ooh, I want a Ford Taurus, right? They're building the same Taurus that drives on every single road. In Michigan and in most of the United States, you have to build a different product every 1,000 feet, right? When you cross over into a different municipal boundary, when you cross over into a different zoning district, you can't take the same housing typology that you put together in the factory and plunk it down on the same size lot. You don't get any of those economies of scale that you get in the auto industry or any manufacturing. You basically have to build every house custom because the zoning changes so significantly from one municipality to the next. And so finding some baseline level where if all of our communities could agree, hey, this is the baseline, this is the minimum viable product that we're willing to allow, but we're all willing to allow it, that would begin to allow private manufacturers to start to find solutions that work in every community. Now, the community doesn't have to say that product is allowable in every zone district across the entire municipality, but if they're all willing to say minimum viable product does exist here, and we're setting aside even 20 or 30 acres for that product type, whether it's your traditional manufactured home community or it's a more kind of modern modular style product that's factory built but looks just like a site built single family home. Beginning to systematize and create some consistency across zoning ordinances would make a huge difference in terms of how do we begin to find efficiencies in the construction cycle.
Thank you. We have a question from Representative Fink.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Much of your presentation resonated with some concerns that I've raised during the course of this committee's meeting in the last year or so. Josh Lunger, who I believe you've worked with in your role at Housing Next, and others have presented on some of these local zoning changes. So, one of my questions is, you mentioned that zoning reform might have to primarily be local. And I think the way you put it is future zoning reform coupled with all of these things that already exist, like LIHTC, tax increment financing, payment in lieu of taxes. That might be kind of a way forward. Well, that would be the one thing that's different, right? Because all those other things already exist. And so I guess to sum up, I'd love to maybe talk a little more. We have, right? But talk a little more about some of the details of zoning reform, like what kind of impact accessory dwelling units by right would have, duplex by right, maybe some kind of either incentive or direction from the state to allow for some quads by right in what are otherwise single-family neighborhoods. I'm interested in all of that. But I guess just the fundamental question is, do you really think it's realistic to say that we're going to do this piece by piece? How many, what do we have, over 1,000 townships in our state, many of which I happen to have like a half dozen that are unzoned in my district, but most people don't. So we're talking about amending thousands of zoning codes, right? What does MML have, like 500 and some members? MTA 1,200 or something members. Some counties have zoning. Isn't that a pretty incredibly hard lift when even like a small, like Hillsdale has a 1,000 square foot minimum home size requirement, which you gave plenty of examples. I'll give you another one. What if you're a 40-year-old single person? You don't have any need for a 1,200 or 1,000 square feet. Or maybe you do, but if you don't, you're happy in 750. And by the way, entire families were raised post-war in neighborhoods of 900 square foot homes, right? So is it realistic to say that we're going to do this locally, piece by piece by piece by piece by piece? Isn't it more likely that some adjustments to the Zoning Enabling Act would at least make more efficient some of these changes that would not harm local character in any way?
Yeah, I think in terms of efficiency, it's far more efficient to have one statewide minimum standard. I think the question is politics, which isn't my realm of expertise, it's yours. And so I think if what you really wanted to do was have maximum impact in the shortest amount of time, some level of statewide reform, or at least kind of a minimum set of options, right, for certain communities that we know are growing and that we know have a housing shortage based on their housing needs assessments, really requiring in the Planning Enabling Act and the Zoning Enabling Act that there is some form of progress moving forward, I think is going to be very helpful.
Okay, so if I were to put you on the spot and say, here's one single change that if you just took this out of the hands of, if you took out the variability you talked about, what's the one, what's one, or if you want to say more than one, go ahead, but is it ADUs? Is it duplexes? Is it minimum home sizes? Is it minimum parking requirements? What's the one thing where would you start?
Yeah, so I think the one that actually produces the most options for equity across the state is some form of ADU. Typically, when we're allowed to convert a portion of an existing home into a secondary unit, whether it's much smaller than the primary unit or it's the same size, sometimes doesn't really matter. It gets into semantics about, well, did you just create a duplex or is an ADU, right? That's for kind of the technocrats to figure out. But allowing for that secondary unit in existing space is the least expensive possible option to like potentially double the number of units that we have in the state in a short period of time, and to make sure that each individual has control over what happens on their own property. But also allowing for the secondary unit to be in the backyard, right, or in the side yard. And those work equally well in rural environments as they do in urban environments. We've got lots of those that already exist in rural environments where, grandma and grandpa built the original house in the, 1940s, and eventually they built a second house for their daughter that she lived in for 40 years, right? And that was on the same property. And now it's a non-conforming use because it's no longer legal. But that was the way families expanded for a long time, was you just built another house on your property because that's what you did.
Yeah, and coming from a rural area, I mean, you see, what started as a garage attic be matured essentially into a small apartment or something. I mean, that does make sense. And in a certain sense, it's the most infill of all infills, right? Because you usually don't even add a square inch of roof.
Yep.
Usually just fill in the house. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Madam Chair, for your indulgence.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. As we move forward with this committee, appreciate giving us an opportunity to look at some potential and some possibilities. Representative Scott moves to excuse absent members. There being no objection, the motion prevails. And there being no more business before the committee will stand adjourned.